All right, so the next section we're talking about is chapter 5. It's the time of absolute monarchs. And what we're talking about with absolutism, we use the term absolutism. That means having an absolute monarch, and the absolute monarch was absolutely in control of the government. So we say, okay, well, all right, that's good. So what was it before then? So in history, you always want to know what happened before and after these big time periods. So what happened before this time period, you studied last year with Miss Locke, it was feudalism. And under feudalism, the power came from the land. Who had the land? The nobles had the land. Okay, were kings powerful during the Middle Ages? A little bit, but not a lot, because they still had to deal with the nobles who owned the land. During feudalism, the land was the power. The land was the money, and the money was the power. So the kings had a relationship with the nobles, and that relationship developed over time. But kings just weren't that all powerful during the Middle Ages. Okay, it was more the power was local. A lot of the nobles had a lot of power, but that started changing with the development over time. So what started changing that was trade, and we talked about before the first few weeks of school. We talked about trade that Italy had, the Italian city-states had, with really the Muslim merchants and the Ottoman Empire that had the spices. So Italy got wealthy on spices. When they started getting wealthy, that led to the growth of towns and cities and a middle class. So when corporations or people make money, it helps everybody. And it started with the development of the towns and cities in Italy, and then that spread to other parts of Europe. Now, once the Portuguese figured out that they wanted to go around Africa to go get the spices and come back, Portugal started making money. And then the Spanish discovered America, and they got colonies. And then the English got colonies, and the French got colonies. And the Dutch were out there sailing around making money on international trade. So here's the thing to keep in mind when we talk about absolutism and kings getting absolute power. During feudalism, the kings could only tax the nobles so much, and the kings could only make so much money. But once international trade started, and once boats started sailing all over the world making money, the kings were the ones that now made the money. And when you have money, you have power. That's just the way it is. So there was this gradual transfer of power from the land and the nobles to the kings. Again, because the kings were the ones that really made the money off of international trade. For the Spanish and the Portuguese, the kings financed the trips. For the English, the French, the kings helped a little bit at first, but then it was corporations that went and made the money. The Dutch, they didn't even have a king. The Dutch was really a republic. The Netherlands was really a republic. And they made money. So there was people making money, and kings got money, and kings getting money, having lots of money, got the power, and they wanted to be absolute monarchs, and they did. So there was, during this time of absolutism, there was conflict between the kings and the nobles, but also there were other entities that had power that struggled against the king and struggled against each other. For example, towns and cities. Towns and cities became more important with trade, and sometimes towns and cities didn't get along with the nobles because the towns and cities had their own rules. They got their own set of rules from the king because the king gave towns and cities a charter. And these are all very general, very broad generalizations that we're making, but in a lot of ways it was the same for people in the Holy Roman Empire, and in France, and in England, and in other parts of Central Europe. But gradually, monarchs got power. Monarchs got power because they were the ones making the money. And so we're talking about absolutism here. And in each one of the countries, your book's got five sections. We'll talk about a couple of different rulers from each one. We don't have time to get into all the different rulers and who did this and all that. But these are just general concepts. So the other thing that came with this concept of absolutism and this powerful monarch was really having a powerful central government. So countries started to develop during this time as we kind of know countries today. Okay? That is, a country having a strong central government with an army that works for the government and rules for the national government and laws for the national government and a bureaucracy, a group of people that work for the national government. All this kind of started under absolutism. Now, the thing that's going to lead out of absolutism, and we'll study this in a few weeks, is the French Revolution. The French Revolution, and there were other revolutions that were reactions to absolutism, but the French Revolution is something that you kids usually know very little about, and so we need to make sure we spend a good amount of time to understand that, because the French Revolution was very influential, not just in France, but Europe and really in a lot of ways the world. But that wasn't the only revolution. The English had their revolution in the mid-1600s, and they cut their king's head off because he was too absolute. We had an American Revolution, which y'all should have heard about at this point, and we got rid of the king, started our own government. A couple years after our revolution was the French Revolution. And then 100 years ago, gosh, maybe almost this week, 100 years ago, the Russians had their own revolution, so the last real absolute king was a Russian king. Okay, so that's where we're going with this. Okay.